Are there any comments online? I don't see any. Are there any non-agenda public comments on the PAB's behalf that we'd like to make?
I need to request permission to be remote for the next meeting.
Motion to excuse Pega to be remote for next meeting. Do I have a second? February 7th. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? See me in favor? Yeah. That's unanimous. Thank you for that. Item 4, request to review Berla IV, Cellbrite, Cellhawk, CB Clear, Faster, Gray Shift, Gray Key, Magnet Forensics, Axiom, Nighthawk, Offender Watch, and RealQuest. Thank you, Officer Jordan, for joining us again today.
Thank you very much for having me, committee. I appreciate it. As noted in regards to following the guidelines of the trust ordinance, we had community meetings and then provided you a notification memo to hear 10 items this evening. I thought that the last time we presented, it went fairly well, where we brought the officers up and they were just able to kind of speak to the technologies rather than play the video. I think that went rather smoothly. So if there's no opposition from the board, I would like to invite Officer Michael Gottfried up to talk about Berla, and then we will continue with each presentation. If there's no questions, we'll move down the line and then go from there.
That sounds good. I think the roundtable works best. Thank you for being here today, Officer Godfrey.
Good evening. My name is Michael Godfrey. I'm a detective and I work in the traffic investigations unit. We are tasked with investigating all fatal and felony traffic collisions that occur within the city of San Diego. The vehicles that we deal with nowadays have complex networks that operate critical safety functions such as brakes and airbags. They control navigation and infotainment systems. This complexity has increased exponentially within the past decade. These systems are constantly collecting performance metrics, monitoring sensor data, scanning external environmental conditions, processing telemetry data, and communicating. Data that is stored by these vehicle systems can be collected and processed. The information contained within the vehicle can be critical evidence during a criminal investigation. This includes information related to vehicle events, location data, and connected devices. Traffic Investigations possesses the Berla IVE Toolkit, which consists of a hardware kit containing interface boards and cables for the acquisition of data from supported vehicles and forensic software to parse the data to be analyzed. The Berla kit is kept and maintained at Traffic Investigations. The kit is used after a crime has been committed, and the analyzed data is provided to the detective as part of an investigation. In order for this data to be obtained, the investigator must have a search warrant or written consent from the vehicle owner. Kit is used by a certified operator upon request of a detective in Traffic Investigations or from another unit within the department. The hardware is connected to the vehicle's infotainment telematics system and creates a copy of the data stored within the system. The acquired data is parsed through the software in order to display the data in an easily viewable manner. Typical data obtained from supported vehicles consists of user data, such as connected devices, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connections, call logs, and contact lists. Navigational data, such as recent destinations, saved locations, track logs, and track points, and vehicle data, such as door openings and closings, gear shifts, ignition starts, odometer readings, and speed logs. An analysis of this data can assist investigators in determining what happened, where it occurred, and who was involved. Besides being used to investigate fatal and felony traffic collisions, the kit has been used to investigate murders, attempted murders, robberies, and series-related burglaries. Thank you.
Are there any questions? You want to do this now, or do you want to wait till the end and come back? How would you like to proceed, sir?
I think if you guys don't mind, we can do an initial round of questions for anything pressing, and then we can kind of let that stew and follow it up, sort of like a roundtable. If there's anything pressing, sure.
I just have one question. Are there other agencies who are using Burla in San Diego?
I do not know
Okay.
in San Diego, but it is used around the world.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Go ahead.
I had a question about not just Burla, but all the Celebrite, which is coming up. They're all very invasive and powerful, and they're all work when you have a search warrant. What are the processes around getting these? How many search warrants does one typically see per year? And are these search warrants imposing any limits on what you can extract? For example, there's tons and tons of stuff on the car. Will there be something saying you can take this but not that, or you can take whatever you want? Or-
Right, in regards to search warrants, in regards to more specific questions, whether it be for Burla or Cellbrite, I would request that the board put that in writing so we can do the adequate research to tell you approximately how many warrants that we did per technology. Now, typically a warrant will come with an affidavit statement of what the items that we're looking for, and outline what we're doing for, probable cause, what we hope to find. It will outline for a judge to review. And then obviously when we go ahead and we, collect those items, we do an inventory, we submit that to the court and say, these were the items that we collected, but we can answer that more in detail. This is kind of a more difficult answer on the fly. I doubt very much the detective has the total number of search warrants, for Burla. If you do, by all means, jump in. But if you want to put that in writing, I'm sure we can do that level of research in regards to the number of uses that we've had. And then I think that kind of information probably would also be included in an annual report as one of the items that we have to report out on, the types of usage, when we use it, times of year, and then kind of the impact on those.
I had a
We'll try to,
question.
sorry, I just mentioned, we'll try to keep the questions, I think kind of clarifying, and then we'll come back at the end for more comments.
Okay, so I just had two quick questions. One, what is the legal standard for using this technology? I was in the description, it states after a crime has been committed, but what would be the legal standard, probable cause, reasonable suspicion for typically using this technology? And my second question is surrounds a third-party sharing. It also says in the surveillance use policy that data can be shared with other law enforcement agencies. So I was just wondering if you could say a little more about the context when that would happen and what that would look like.
The answer to your first question, the legal standard, as I believe the detective mentioned, would be probable cause for a warrant or a consent of the owner of the vehicle. Written consent, I would imagine, be applied for document that the consent was knowingly and willingly given. Those would be the two standards. In addition, as far as the use, it could be in many different cases as far as sharing of information. For instance, a felony type crime could be shared with the district attorney's office for potential for prosecution. Or if it was cross jurisdictional, a pursuit that ended in another jurisdiction that might lead to a joint investigation. It could depend on a number of different factors, but obviously it would be kind of it would be pertinent or related to the incident itself as to the number of jurisdictions impacted. And then whether it's potentially a felony crime for their district attorney's prosecution, or in our city, the city attorney's office also handles misdemeanor crimes. So depending on the law enforcement agency. Is that anything further to add?
Yeah, so it's gonna depend on the request. If it's one of our detectives or if it's a detective from another agency that might request us to assist in an investigation, then we obviously would provide them with that data. But typically, this data is given to the district attorney after the detectives as part of a criminal investigation. And then, of course, it's provided via discovery to a defense attorney. But that would be for the most part, that I can think of, the extent of the sharing of that data.
Would that also include federal agencies like Border Patrol, those kinds of federal agencies as well, potentially?
I imagine if it was involving, say, a border patrol vehicle that was in a felony car crash or something in a pursuit, I mean, in a hypothetical, possibly. I don't know if we've ever done that, or we've ever investigated that. Nothing comes to mind, but that would be the only scenario. Say there was a pursuit of a vehicle and crashed, and we were looking at potentially investigating or being the investigating body of that type of thing to determine whether or not criminal charges would be forthcoming for the federal agent involved.
I don't know a ton about Burla specifically, but at least my knowledge of infotainment systems is that it's often kind of sticky where you start your car and then you're often not sure what exactly is happening in the background. So as it pertains to the PD, I mean, I'm just gonna probably reform this into a more concrete question in our Q&A later, but just something to think about. Is there a way to know how well-trained people are as a general? Like how is there any kind of training on the technology that we can probably put a concrete label on? Or is this kind of just does Brilla specifically exist within like other investigative tools, auto tools? I'm just kind of curious how this is given upon the force, if that makes any sense.
Are you kind of asking like how many, who would you actually use the equipment type of a question?
How familiar are
Training?
officers with it? Yeah.
So as far as I know, there's only 3 people in the entire police department that have been through the training course to use this equipment, and we've all been to Burla's certification course. So at this point, the only people that actually would have access to this equipment, would have the passwords to use it, have been certified by Burla and have been through their training on how to use the equipment. And that's
Okay, that's
3 people right now.
good to start with. I'll come with more later, but anything else from the PAB? We'll go on to the next one. Thank you much.
I'd like to invite Sergeant Jacob Mosteller up to speak to RealQuest. It's Sergeant Jacob Mosteller, Mostele, sorry, 2 L's, ER, common spelling.
Thank you for being here today. Master. I also want to note that Khaled has arrived at 6 o'clock. Is present as of 6 o'clock. Thank you again for being here, Officer Mosteller.
Hello, my name is Jake Mosteller. I'm a sergeant with the San Diego Police Department's Abandoned Vehicle Abatement Unit, also known as the AVA unit. The AVA unit responds to complaints throughout the city regarding inoperable vehicles stored on private property. These vehicles are often in violation of the City of San Diego Municipal Code. Civil codes within the municipal code regulate how inoperable vehicles can be stored. Police Code Compliance Officers, or PCCOs, are non-sworn police department members tasked with responding to and resolving these complaints. Oftentimes, PCCOs respond to a location and find a vehicle in violation of the city's civil code. PCCOs make every effort to contact the owner of the private property. Sometimes PCCOs are unable to reach the owner because the property is uninhabited and the neighbors do not know how to reach the property owner. PCCOs leave notices on the property in these instances. Unfortunately, some property owners have not responded to the PCCO's attempts to contact them. If a PCCO is unable to reach a property owner by other means, the PCCO will use RealQuest online services to identify the property owner and find a mailing address. RealQuest provides authorized users access to multiple listing service information, property tax information, and property ownership information. It may only be used by members of the public who purchase a subscription for the service. All of the information contained in RealQuest is open source information available to anyone who pays for the subscription. RealQuest Online Services provides a quick and easy means for PCCOs to access public records to determine the ownership of real property through a secure online application. RealQuest saves time by quickly providing this information so PCCOs do not have to track down through other city or county departments. Once PCCOs obtain the needed information from RealQuest, they send a certified letter to the property owner in an attempt to gain their voluntary compliance in adhering to the city's civil code. Generally, once PCCOs are able to establish communication with the property owner, the property owner takes the steps necessary to remove the inoperable vehicle or store it in a legal fashion. In rare instances, PCCOs have used their communication with an uncooperative property owner to obtain a court order to have an inoperable vehicle removed. In those instances, a civil fine can be imposed against the property owner.
Additional questions on RealQuest?
Yeah, it's interesting technology. Could you give me an example of how this technology might typically be used by the police department? Just kind of give some context of a typical way in which this technology would be used, if you could, please.
Sure.
Like an example.
Sure, no problem. So a police code compliance officer receives a complaint from a community member regarding an abandoned vehicle being stored on private property not owned by the city. When the PCCO arrives at the scene, they make every attempt to contact the property owner. However, sometimes they are unable to. If through a series of attempts to contact the owner, they're unsuccessful, they will access this information and look at public records to see where different information is being sent to in order to contact the property owner. So that might be property tax information or say water department information. Obviously, these bills are being paid for and received by somebody. So the mailing address is then used to send a certified letter to the property owner so that the property owner can be in contact with the PCCO and resolve the issue of the vehicle that's being stored.
That's the only use, right?
That's the only time we use that technology. Yes, ma'am.
Just curious, not too familiar with it. Just trying to look up its competitors. Why that technology in specific, RealQuest?
I'm sorry, are you asking if they're the only service available?
Or that we've looked into, or specifically them, what they offer that makes them just, I know they're widely available.
Right. There are other options, other paths to get the same information. RealQuest provides us with the ability to access it quickly so that we have a good response time when dealing with community member concerns, complaints. Do they have a direct competitor? I'm sorry, I couldn't answer that.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Mosteller.
Thank you, sir.
If the board, board chair would just make sure like, hey, there's no more questions, I'll just bring up the next person. We can kind of move this along. So criminalist Brian Liu is here, and he's going to speak to the next 3 technologies, which are Celebrate, Grayshift, Graykey, and Magnet Forensics Axiom. I'll have him introduce each technology, and then we'll kind of do one at a time, answer your questions, and then you can direct him to move on to the next when you're finished. I'd appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Brian Liu. I'm a criminalist with the San Diego Police Department Crime Lab. I'm speaking on behalf of Lisa Mercheski, the supervising criminalist of the San Diego Police Department Crime Laboratory, specifically over these technologies. I will be discussing 3 technologies used by the lab. The first is Cellebrite's Universal Forensics Extraction Device Platform. Universal Forensics Extraction Device Platforms by Cellebrite extract data from mobile devices, such as cell phones. The software is used at San Diego Police Headquarters. The software is only used when there is proper legal authority to search a phone signed by a judge, or if the authorized user of that device gives consent. Cellebrite software is used to extract data from mobile devices for investigative purposes. Officers and detectives who have completed training and have been authorized can use that software as well. Criminalists in the Forensic Technology Unit, where I work, of this laboratory use the software as part of their duties, and it can only be used with proper legal authority and training.
I have a question about work devices. For a work device, whose consent do you get? The employee or the employer?
So as a member of the laboratory, that responsibility would fall on our investigators to obtain that consent in the case where, I guess if it's a work device, there's probably some agreement between an employee and their employer in place. In that scenario, I'm not quite sure. That would probably be more of a legal question that we can provide an answer for at another time.
Without clear indication of who owns the device in that kind of scenario, I would imagine our investigators would automatically move towards obtaining a warrant. And obviously a warrant would not be issued without probable cause. we're not going to allow confusion over ownership. One of the first things we do regarding any time of consent is to make sure the person has the ability to give that consent.
Hi, I have a question about your auditing and oversight. I'm specifically looking at your impact report, I believe it is, or use policy. Can't tell which one this is. The reason why I'm asking about Cellbrite is in the auditing and oversight, it says FTU maintains a log of all authorized Cellbrite users that tracks how many times the software was accessed by the user, and that you're also responsible for all software and granting access to the system.
Okay.
How many people have access to grant that access in the unit?
So the forensic technology and the crime laboratory are the people that put on training for our investigators. So that would be 3 members currently. We alone have the ability to conduct that training for our investigators that would like to be able to use the software for their own investigations.
And then I just have a follow-up question. When you say you maintain a log of all authorized users and how many times they log in, are you pulling that data from Cellbrite? Or
Data-
is there a cloud repository? Okay,
So the usage of each of the tools is maintained on the tool itself. So we are able to pull logs when requested.
so can a regular end user who is, working in your unit, can they also pull those logs? Or is it just for those who have the access level? Can anyone pull those logs and alter them at all or have access to them? Or is it just the people who are granting the access who can pull that data?
Don't have a concrete answer for you.
Okay.
I do know for sure the logs are not editable. So they're not manipulated. If we were to pull the logs, those are generated for us.
Thank you.
Does Cellbrite give specific advice on how or how not to disclose its use?
Can you maybe rephrase your question for me? I'm not sure I understand that.
You asking if a non-disclosure agreement is attached to Cellbrite?
Not specifically, more, is there anything, have there been instances where they've at least reach out to the PD and provided any kind of information on how they want their technology to be used? Don't want technology to be just exposed in some way if it's not in some kind of case, or if it's not brought up in some way. I'm just asking if they're giving any kind of direction, specifically different from just a general non-disclosure agreement.
So I guess you're asking for, do they have operational guidelines that they provide to the department and somehow establish parameters of its use? Is that kind of what
Yeah,
you're asking
yes.
for?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any. I don't know if our criminalist is.
No, we're not given any sort of parameters as to when or how we could use the tool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize for coming late to the board, and I may have missed the beginning of Pega's question. So if this is repetitive, I apologize. You mentioned that you officers or whoever can get access to the information either through a judge or through the permission of authorized users. And who are the authorized users and what do they base access permission to? What do they base that on?
So the search warrants that are obtained by the police department in order to search a device all have to fall under the regulations of the California Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And so as part of those, as part of following that, the only way to obtain legal authority to search a device using Cellbrite or any of the other tools I'm going to present on today, the options are getting a search warrant, which would be signed by a judge, and the authorized user would be the person who is the primary user of the device.
When you say device of the cell phone,
Yes, it
Got
could be a
it.
cell phone, it
Okay,
could be a
that's-
tablet device.
Moving on.
second technology I'm presenting on is called Gray Key by Grayshift. Gray Key is hardware and software that's used to extract data from mobile devices such as cell phones. Technology is like Cellebrite. It is used in the forensic technology unit in the crime lab only. That is located also at police headquarters. It can be used only when there's proper legal authority to search a phone, which is again signed by a judge, or consent is given by the authorized user. The tool is used to extract data from devices, and they're only done for investigative purposes. The criminalists in the forensic technology unit, I said earlier, there are 3 of us, are the only people authorized in the entire police department to use that tool as part of their regular duties. And it can only be used again with proper legal authority and training.
Full disclosure, I think the question is, right, is it being used? Do we know to the extent of its use? And is there anything that you can say about so its use in the lab, but what does that tell us about the nature of the cases in which it's used or the nature of how it's used by it being in the lab only?
I don't want to speak for the criminalists, but I will. Typically, we're not downloading phones that, for petty crimes and such. We're looking at this kind of technology and use in violent crimes, homicides, sexual assaults, aggravated assaults, stuff that is of significant public safety threat. I think that would be a question though, or I think further follow-up, if you would like to get further analysis or maybe a kind of a scope of the manner in which it's been used, how many times and what types of cases. I think that would be something that would require a little bit more research than the criminalist is prepared to give this evening.
That's fair. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, will you be providing us with that information? When and how it's used, for examples, the criteria of when it's being used or not?
Based on the various committees that we've dealt with, we've been, I think, more than forthcoming to meet with, provide information, answer written questions. I think time and time again, we have provided detailed responses to this board when asked specific questions. To the extent that we have this information, we will provide it.
I don't think there's any recent kind of dodging. If there's a targeted scope of our questions, so far it's been a pretty good back and forth exchange.
To the extent that whenever you've wanted to meet, we've made time, we've tried to carve that out. We've tried to answer all your written questions. And I think that that's the kind of relationship that we'll continue to engage in going forward. And obviously, if you feel at any given time, there's some kind of question that isn't being answered to the fullest ability, or I always stand ready as a liaison to this committee to contact me, and I'll see what I can do. If the information is available, I'll do the best of my ability to provide it to you.
2024 is off to a good start, huh?
I don't know, maybe my questions, so I was asking if you could not, is it possible, but I would like to see that information? Are you saying you'd like me to write a?
We've been providing questions for each technology group, and they've been responding each round with plenty of information to that. So if we
have a list.
If we ask for specifically, that's the response. Yeah. Depending on what exactly is asked.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I was asking, are you just saying that I should put a written request to ask?
I'm being specific. I'm asking for a written request. I would like there to be specific information. One of the nice things that have been going, I guess, in the last couple of months is there really hasn't been any vagueness. The questions have been very specific as to what you're looking for. We try to give specific answers to that question. I think it goes a long way, and to the extent that, we could even publish those or provide those online. These are the kind of questions other community members may have similar questions. I think that's kind of the way forward, as fullness, as far as accountability, transparency. I mean, obviously, we would provide that information in all likelihood in the aggregate if we had it, because we wouldn't be revealing specifics to ongoing investigations that could somehow jeopardize a prosecution or some kind of investigation. But aggregate data, I think, would, possibly be available.
Okay, and then as a follow-up question, is there a list of criteria that things would have to meet, or is it just kind of a case by case basis that, hey, we would like to use it now?
I would have to defer to the criminalist, and I'm not sure if they have a standard list that they typically check off that it has to meet a certain box before they do it.
So to answer your question about when it would be used, based on our decision-making process, the tools that we have in our laboratory at our disposal, I liken to having different tools in your tool belt. So some of the tools are great at doing a certain function. Perhaps they're better at extracting data from a specific type of phone. So we pick our tools to extract data based on which tool has the best capabilities towards extracting the data from that device.
Got it.
And just for clarification, it's the same legal criteria, right? So it's judge signed warrant or consent to access the phone.
That's
Just
correct.
like in the other example you gave.
Except my question was, sorry, he made me ask another question. My question wasn't about the judge part. I understand the authorized users
Yes.
part. I don't, can any authorized user just go, this feels like it's something that would be applicable, and that's how it goes.
So the authorized user is
Oh,
specifically.
I messed it up. I apologize. The authorized user is the person who owns the phone.
I'm just. All the forensics, this is not just the criminalist that's looking at that. Typically, an investigator based on, a crime is making that request for our forensic technology unit to do that. I think, and I don't want to speculate, but I think you were almost asking, what are the typical types of crimes? Homicide, robbery, aggravated
Yes.
assault, that I think that you're getting at. I don't know if we have a defined list. What I would say is that, we have a limited number of users. Typically, these type of requests come from a detective. It's not the criminalist's job to determine which one. It's going to be coming from, in all likelihood, a centralized investigator in sex crimes, robbery, homicide, those kinds of things. Something that threatens public safety and so forth. To the extent that if we have a very finite list, we'll get that. And if we don't, we'll tell you that we don't, but these are typically the criteria.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
So that we just sort of can understand what your unit is, you're forensic, so are you like the CSI of the department? Is that what this is? You do analysis on all the forensic evidence in a
So,
lab?
so the lab is a very big entity in the police department. Actually, if I break it down, there's probably eight units or so, each specializing in a specific type of analysis. So when I speak of the forensic technology unit, that unit's role specifically is to extract data from mobile devices.
Okay,
So that is where I fit in this piece of the puzzle in the crime lab, at least. We have other units that would do exactly what you imagine, like CSI, that kind of work. There's a specific unit for that. There's a specific unit for all the other types of crime lab work.
thank you.
I guess I asked the earlier question about its use specifically in the lab because there's sort of interesting features at least that I'm familiar with. So do you know if Hide UI is utilized much? So I think it's used to record. So it's modified in the lab, but even after you give it back, or it's modified wherever it's modified, the user's device, and even after you give it back to a user, it'll still record kind of incognito. So that can be how it's used, even if it's only been accessed sort of in a lab environment. So that was the nature of my background for that. So in follow-up, are you familiar if that's a feature that's used at all, or if that's something that would require more background, or that I think it's called Hide UI, but does that kind of action?
So two parts of that question. I have heard of what you're talking about, the hiding the UI. Is that what you said?
I think the feature as it's specifically called on GrayKey is Hide UI, all one word, but it does that sort of background monitoring after it's been handed back.
Right, so I've heard of the feature. I can tell you we do not use it.
Fair enough. Moving on.
The third and last technology for me is Magnet Forensics Axiom. Axiom is a software that can recover, process, and analyze digital evidence that has been extracted from a mobile device, such as a cell phone. The Forensic Technology Unit is the only unit to use that software as well, that is in the laboratory at headquarters. We use the tool to prepare data reports, which are provided to our investigators when a phone has been legally extracted. The software is used because it is able to provide these data reports back in a readable format, and it is easier for our investigators to review. The criminalists in the Forensic Technology Unit are, like I said, the only ones authorized to use this software as part of our regular duties, and extracting the cell phone data that is put into this software is, of course, extracted pursuant to obtaining legal authority.
Could you just clarify how this technology is different than the other ones you just explained? Maybe give an example of how it's typically used, a scenario where it might be used.
So the two previous tools are primarily used, actually the only use for them is to extract data from a device such as a cell phone. The Axiom tool, which we are discussing now, is a tool that will interpret that extracted data into a readable human format. So whereas the first two tools are extracting what would be more like computer language, it's the raw data from the devices. This tool is being used to translate that computer language into a format that you and I can read or interact with. We can filter and search. It categorizes the evidence by, these are chats, these are photos, these are whatever it is. So that is what the primary use of this tool is to essentially organize that extracted data for our investigators to review.
Is that the only difference between these, or are there other differences between these three technologies? Is one like for iOS, and are there other differences? Why are there three of them?
So the first two tools are used to extract data. Really the only reason we have them both because they do better at different types of devices. One does not necessarily do better with just iPhones or just Android phones. Both can do both types of phones, but sometimes a specific model is not supported with one tool, so the other tool might be then the go-to tool. So we have to have different tools in our inventory to go to so that we can extract data from a device. Otherwise, nothing would be produced from us, and that's essentially what would happen. So we like to have those two tools because they are complementary to each other. This third tool that we're discussing now is really just to make the information that is extracted by the first two just easier for our investigators to review.
So can you use the first two without the last one? Can you use Celebrite and Great Key without Axiom? Or do you need Axiom in order to?
Right, we can. We, as part of the Celebrite group of tools, it has its own way of interpreting that data as well, so it can generate the reports as Axiom does. So similarly to how we have Great Key and Celebrite to extract data, this Celebrite portion that creates readable information from the extracted data creates it in a different format than the way that Axiom does. Some people prefer the way that the Axiom report looks. Some people prefer the way the Celebrite report looks. And so we have both tools just in case one is easier for another to view.
On that note, do you seek tools that can kind of do that all in one? Are there potentially departments that do things very differently, and you're even looking at how that's done? Is there a thought to change this, or is this a setup that makes sense for various reasons and it's sort of state of the art in its own?
Right, so industry standard for this specific field is to use these tools. That's just what the majority of the agencies across the United States would be using. I would venture to say probably globally as well. So it is going to be the commonplace in pretty much this space, we're going to be providing reports in either of these formats at a regular basis.
You're speaking law enforcement, police, state, federal, all over.
This would apply to state, federal as well. Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. So what's your fail safe? Have you ever run into a place, or I want to ask about BCA, business continuity, but I don't want to ask about DR and disaster recovery or any of that. I want to ask the question of what's your fail safe? If this technology can't do what it's supposed to do, what are your steps? What is it that the police department is guaranteed, City of San Diego is guaranteed that this is a continuous, provided, always supported, always maintained and upgraded application? What's your fail safe to say that it will always work? When it doesn't work or it can't extract or can't work, what do you do?
Okay, so when a device is unable to be extracted, sometimes we cannot provide that information to our investigator who's requesting that. So if we happen to have the consent of the authorized user of a device, we may be provided a passcode to a phone, in which case that phone can be searched. It can be recorded with either like a video camera or a phone. We have that capability to just kind of record ourselves scrolling through a device, to record the information that's on there, preserving it in any way we possibly can. But if we are unable to access that device without a passcode or, without the passcode due to the extreme levels of security on our devices nowadays, we would be unable to provide that.
So I have a follow-up question. If that's the case, is there an opportunity to contact the vendor for some type of support, or do they just say, this version of the software does not allow you to do it for this device? What type of arrangement are you guys in to make sure that your business continuity is kept? If you still, hey, we can't do that, we can try to act like the end user and get the pass, but who makes that call with respect to the purchase of the software? Like, hey, we need support, we need you, this has to happen. Do you ever have those demands, or you just give up and say, we'll try as the end user with the passcode?
So as far as the technology goes, it is what they can provide. If
Okay.
it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Okay,
That's high level
Okay.
methodology that they're putting into this. So if they haven't figured out a way to extract data from a specific device, there's just not a way to do it at that present time. So we would have to wait for the next update, like you're referring to. With this specific version, we're just out of luck here. We're not going to be able to provide you with extracted data from this case.
and is there an identified system administrator at the police department or at the city who handles the maintenance, the upgrades, who's the contact person or the system administrator?
So my unit, the forensic technology unit, obtains all the updates from the company. We're in regular contact with them. If there are issues with support or anything like that, we can reach out. Hey, we've tried with this phone. It's an important case, whatever it might be. Do you have an idea on how we can do this? Did I miss something? Oftentimes the answer is simply, we cannot extract data from that device at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Just following up on what Tora said, don't you sometimes go to the device manufacturer, Apple or Samsung or whatever, and ask them to help you out?
No, we don't.
I mean, it's
Not in the
happening.
crime lab, at least. We don't contact any of the cell phone manufacturers to do that. No.
Do you ever limit what you're extracting, or is it always all or nothing?
So the tools extract what the tools extract. We can't modify how that works. If it gives us the capability to extract a portion, then we can, but we're really at the mercy of what the tool allows us to do. Most of the time nowadays, given how phones work, it's all or nothing.
So what do you do with things that are irrelevant? Or, for example, passwords and things like that that are stored on a device that might not be relevant to whatever the investigation is?
So, let's see. So when we obtain a request from an investigator, this is just kind of how the lab operates. We obtain a request for work on a specific device related to an investigation that they're conducting. They're going to give us that search warrant obtained that was signed by a judge. And so the warrant usually details the information that can be extracted and what will be admissible. Our legal guidance, based on the people in our department that we've sought counsel with, has informed us that the information that is extracted from those devices is to be provided for the investigation, and that would be in totality. So prior to it appearing before a jury trial or whatever, it's going to go through its stages with the prosecution and the defense. They will collaborate to ensure that no exculpatory evidence was missed, even though that might not necessarily have, how am I trying to say this? The goal is to not remove exculpatory evidence from an extraction, because we do extract that device in totality. There's not a way to prevent that. So the attorneys then meet, and before they present it, they will determine what can and cannot be shared based on the limitations of that search warrant. So the information provided in those reports that we're making with these tools, specifically like the Axiom tool and the report format of Cellebrite's tool, allow like our end user investigators to filter out the reports. So when the attorneys meet and decide that this information is not going to be allowable in court, they can filter that data out because of whatever legal reasons. And then that's how that information would then be presented.
But then the irrelevant information is still maintained somewhere, right? At the lab or somewhere.
Correct.
Okay. It's not used in court, but it's still maintained somewhere.
Yes, a copy of everything that is produced, the entire work product, is always going to be saved pursuant to the statute of limitations of an investigation.
Do investigators, sorry, go ahead.
I think what Brian's trying to allude to is we never want to be accused of, destroying or removing information that exculpatory evidence, to be clear, will be evidence that may be likely to prove the innocence of somebody, being prosecuted. So oftentimes what Brian's alluding to is the prosecutor and the defense are talking about what's going to be admissible in the court. And there's a process to go through that we're making sure that we don't destroy something that is later going to come down the line saying, well, that information, you may interpreted that wrong, or that really shows this. And I think what Brian's alluding to, this is a process that goes beyond, his job is to download it, provide the information to the investigator, and then obviously that information passed down to the prosecutor. And then during the discovery process, there's a determination about what the relevance truly is. And I think the relevance goes really beyond the forensic technology unit and really determined by the parties in a court proceeding to determine what's relevant and what not. But we also want to basically be sure that we're not destroying something that can later be said, hey, that would have shown that my party wasn't at that scene, or that party wasn't involved in that type of crime. Does that make sense?
Sure, that would be relevant information, of course.
That's been a theme a few times. Is there a common complaint, or is there something that investigators mentioned about just the amount of data, and if there was just an innate way to have a more narrow scope, then you'd only need to store a certain amount? Is that something about the tool that is a complaint by investigator, or is that something that's not a problem at all? That's the amount of data that you have to deal with currently is fine.
I mean, the amount of data is the amount of data. We're not necessarily assigning its value when we extract the data. What we strive to do is to provide a total picture of what was on that device. So nowadays, a phone is capable of storing a terabyte of data, and it just is what it is. So we're in the business of preserving that entirety. and providing that to an investigator. If it's a terabyte of information, because that's what the phone has, that's what they're getting.
Would like to know certainly at some point if there's just, maybe they're encumbered by it and then they would like, if there are avenues to not have to do that in such a fashion as phones get capable to store more and more data. So that's only going to get more cumbersome in the future.
Right, and part of the beauty of some of these reporting tools is that they're able to provide different ways to interact with the data. So they can search it better. They can switch, like instead of reading it, like search text bubbles in a conversation, they might want to then switch to viewing photos and videos. Well, it will switch its view mode so that you can now view something in a gallery format. So the tools adapt to that in terms of what data is provided. You know, if there's going to be location information and that might be there, it just makes a whole lot more sense to interact with the data in a way that we're used to nowadays. So the tools allow for that to happen, and that allows an investigator to sift through that data better.
That paints an incredibly clear picture. Thank you.
Real quick, and so if it is a terabyte, how are you providing that? Is it in a secure zip file on the SDPD network? Is it a, what is it? Is it a SSD?
Right, so the report formats are secured. They're unalterable. We provide those on encrypted drives to our investigators. They're specifically assigned for cell phone data. We have policies in place to ensure that that is protected data, remains confidential.
Thank you.
I think we're happy with that. Thank you very much.
One of the follow-ups to your point is we get a lot of complaints sometimes from the media or from communities that our investigations are not proceeding fast enough. Everybody wants an answer quickly. I think we're all aware that there have been some, or at least one I'm thinking of in particular, where the investigation required 4 terabytes of data for investigators to go through and took an excess of a year. But it's more importantly for us to do the information and to make sure that we're right rather than we get things done quickly. If our investigators need to take a year to do that, then they're going to go through the information that they have to go
Certainly.
through. Next individual is going to be supervising criminalist Sean Monpetit, and he'll be talking about FASTR.
Good evening. My name is Sean Monpetit. I'm supervising criminalist with the San Diego Police Department Crime Laboratory, and I work in the forensic biology unit, which does the DNA testing for the laboratory. Software I want to talk to you about today is called FASTR. FASTR is a specialized software package that helps us to take raw data from our genetic analyzer instrument, process it, and turn it into DNA information that fully trained and qualified analysts will then interpret and make comparisons to DNA profiles from people that are thought to be associated with those investigations. And only people that are specifically trained and qualified to use this software are using it in the laboratory. The data that we get from it is basically maintained on a separate network in our laboratory, and only the criminalists in the unit have access to it.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by building these profiles?
To do that, I would require a little bit of background on the DNA testing process. So if you give me a couple of seconds to do that, I can try and keep it short. So in the DNA testing process, we evaluate evidence items for potential biological fluids, or maybe for DNA that may have been left there just through contact. We do an extraction of that DNA, purify it, estimate how much human DNA is contained within a sample, and then we run a test to detect DNA types that are present at specific genetic markers in the human genome. And those are essentially the information that we run through these genetic analyzer machines. And that information is turned into data that the criminalist can then interpret. And so the information that we're getting is DNA types at specifically the 24 DNA markers that we look at to produce a genetic profile.
My wife's a biologist. She's gonna love this stuff. I'm just working on that. Any comments? So, by DNA types as a general term really means these 24 genetic markers and turning that into data that criminalists can then use to infer information about a crime scene. What kind of all kind of DNA too, so we can deal with human, animal, any kind of genetic or can it not use or do anything with animal DNA?
Well, the software itself is really sort of agnostic to what type of DNA you're looking at it. We in the crime laboratory specifically are looking at DNA from human genome. And so that is what we're using the software to analyze.
Thank you.
How is the DNA typically collected in the forensics process?
The DNA typically comes from crime scenes, or it could be associated with victims or suspects in crimes. It is collected either through by the investigators, by officers in the field, or by people from the crime laboratory that specialize in crime scene response and collection of evidence.
I have a question. So I'm taking note of the report, impact report, and I'm seeing that you're using GeneMapper IDX currently, and you've been using that since 2008. Super outdated, has not been upgraded, and I'm assuming it's not supported anymore by whoever GeneMappers since 08. That's what it sounds like. And so this faster software would be an upgrade to that. Do you feel like this would, I mean, I know it's obvious you guys need this, right? The department needs this. How much faster would it be compared to GeneMapper IDX?
I don't know that the speed of the program is really different. But the software, the faster software is definitely superior. It adds additional features, such as it helps the analyst to interpret how many people potentially are contributing DNA to a sample. So it does have additional features that would be incredibly beneficial to our process.
Thank you.
Is it possible to see an example of what a profile looks like?
Right now, no, but we could definitely provide that.
I'm sure, I don't mean right now, I mean in general.
Yes, ultimately, it looks like a series of peaks raised off of a baseline. Whenever DNA is detected by the instrument, there is a elevation from baseline, and that corresponds to a specific DNA marker and a specific DNA type. And the software helps us to determine which DNA types those are at those markers.
It would be helpful to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Supervising Management Analyst Jordan Fankhauser is next. He'll be speaking to two technologies, CellHawk and CP Clear. Jordan?
Good evening. My title is actually Program Coordinator, but I'm a crime analyst for the San Diego Police Department.
And sorry, I didn't catch your name again.
Jordan Fankhauser.
Thank you.
You need to spell it or anything, or it's a long one?
I'm fine.
Okay. As I stated, my name is Jordan Fankhauser. I'm a crime analyst with the San Diego Police Department. Crime analysts often assist investigators, patrol staff, or administrative staff on a variety of tasks, but primarily for criminal investigations. In this instance, we're going to talk about one of the specific tools that we use along with our investigators to investigate cell phone records. That tool is CellHawk. CellHawk is used by members of the San Diego Police Department to aid in the investigation of a crime. It is software designed to visually display cell phone records on a map. The billing records of a specific cell phone number are legally obtained from a cell phone provider upon the judicial approval of a search warrant. All San Diego Police Department users granted access to CellHawk have passed a background investigation. They access the software using computers located in our secure law enforcement facilities, generally obtained after a search warrant. The software and uploaded records are not accessible to the public. CellHawk is used by the San Diego Police Department in two ways. Firstly, the software is used by investigators and crime analysts such as myself to map the cell phone records of a specific cell phone. These mapped records can be used to determine the general location of a phone during a defined specific period of time as outlined in the search warrant. The investigator is legally bound to inform the subscriber of the cell phone that their records have been obtained as a result of the search warrant. Secondly, in a life or death situation, such as a kidnapping, for example, investigators may choose to use CellHawk to display the precise location of a specific cell phone based on updates sent from that cell phone's provider. We call this exigent circumstances, like an emergency. After that situation is resolved, however, the investigator must still submit an after-action search warrant for judicial approval. I'm here for your questions regarding CellHawk at this time.
When you say general location of a cell phone, how general, how nuanced?
Yeah, it's depicted in two ways. So kind of the classic example would be we get sort of the who, what, when, where, why, if you imagine the phone. So if you imagine your billing records, right, you get who called you, who did you call, who did you text, that kind of stuff. And in certain instances, we get the cell towers location of that transaction. So whether it be a text message or a call, and we can use that to determine not always exactly where the phone was, but we can get the tower's location and we can get the direction that the antenna was facing. So the idea would be, if you have a certain location where you know a crime occurred, we have a person we think might committed that crime, we can get the tower's location and the direction of that, that antenna and see if they were in the general neighborhood. The other example would be your cell network sometimes uses your information to basically calculate how well the network is doing, right? So is it giving you a good signal? And they call that engineering data. And when they're doing that, they try to estimate where your phone is. And the easy way to explain that would be like the tower kind of knows what direction you are. And if you guys might imagine like a radar gun, it shoots a signal out, bounces back, and then however long that takes, it tries to get a distance estimate. So the network's always doing that. It's just trying to improve its network service for you. And so sometimes we can use those records to get an estimate of the phone as well. So to put it short, either the tower's location or the phone's estimate, but it depends on the provider, depends on the time of day, and it depends on about how far back we're looking.
You mentioned you're required to tell users when their phones have been cell hawked. Is there a requirement on when that has to happen?
I'm not sure of the specific notification time frame, but that's more on the investigator side of the house. We're kind of the end users of the technical side. But as far as I'm aware, they are required to do that at some point.
Which units are allowed to use this technology? Are we just talking about your everyday police officer, or is this something specifically used by detectives?
Yeah, this is going to be limited to investigators, in this case, detectives and crime analysts, people that are typically working on crimes where you would need to locate suspects, or for exigent circumstances like our special investigations unit. So, yes.
I want to piggyback on what Sid said. I just have a follow-up to what he asked. In the purpose on the surveillance use policy for CellHawk, it says it's specialized mapping software designed to ingest files containing location-based data for easy visualization and subsequent analysis. It'd be nice if it on the purpose said for criminal activity or investigation of crimes.
Sure.
Because me looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, so can they use it internally for those cases? Because it does say, you know, the reason why it would be used would be for a detective or an investigator or what have you assigned to a case. So just sort of verifying that it's for criminal cases and not like an HR case or any internal affairs, you know, something like that would be nice.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything else before we move on to CP Clear? Moving on.
All right, moving on to CP Clear. The San Diego Police Department uses CP Clear, an internet-based online service provided by Thomson Reuters. CP Clear offers real-time resources to locate information about individuals, utilities, and assets. It is a valuable tool for exigent circumstances as well as during criminal investigations. When is it most helpful? Typically, we're using this for higher level investigations, such as homicides, sexual assaults, robberies, fugitive apprehension, or to locate missing persons, kidnapping or child abductions. Addresses of residents, business licenses, bankruptcy filings, vehicle registrations, phone numbers, and property ownership are included in the results. Access is provided and managed at a user level with computers located in secure law enforcement facilities or on mobile devices with encryption and our city's own multi-factor authentication. Access to CP Clear is on a need to know and a right to know basis, meaning that there is an active crime case or law enforcement events that initiates the data inquiry. All users have passed backgrounds for employment with the San Diego Police Department. Data available includes information gathered primarily from Experian and Equifax, which you might be familiar with running credit history, consumer credit reporting agencies, but it's not a means for running credit history or credit reports. So it has the source data, but it cannot be used to run said reports. In short, CP Clear is a pointer system gathering a myriad of resources in order to locate persons at risk or to solve violent crimes. I'm here for any questions you might have.
That was pretty clear. Thank you, officer.
Thank you. Oh, yes.
What would you say the difference between the CellHawk and CP Clear was? CellHawk, it's required to have a warrant from a judge, and then in CP Clear, it's just need to know, right to know?
Yeah, so with CellHawk, right, that's a tool that we were using after the fact with records obtained from a search warrant. So it's basically, we already have material that we're looking at, and it's a visual tool that we're using. In the case of CP Clear, that's a purely investigative tool that's used in this case for investigations. They're required to put a crime case identifier on there that we could use for auditing purposes. So it's not like they can just go in and run any sort of query anytime. But in this case, there's not always a search warrant required to run an inquiry. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and then can you paint a picture kind of how you did with CellHawk, how that information would be used in the investigation?
Yeah, so there's essentially a simple query tool on the front end. You imagine it like a who, what, when, where, why of kind of what you're looking for. So you can run addresses, you can run people, phone numbers, typical things like that. It's going to spit out a report of possibles. So imagine if you're looking for an individual who might be a suspect in a crime case and possible home locations for them. So it's pulling on a lot of that credit reporting history to provide historical addresses, phone numbers, possible relatives, and it's produced in a kind of a comprehensive report for that individual. And it's a packet essentially that we then can take and use it for, again, pointers to look for possible, current home locations or phone numbers and things like that, that we would then go out and verify and try to get a search warrant on for further investigation.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Sergeant Monica Robinson, and she'll be speaking on Offender Watch.
Good evening.
For being here.
I'm Detective Sergeant Monica Robinson of the San Diego Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the San Diego Police Department's Sex Offender Registration Unit. People convicted of certain sex and arson crimes are required by state and federal law to register where they live with the law enforcement agency having jurisdiction over their registered address. The California Sex and Arson Registry is also known as CSAR. In Offender Watch, there are two databases utilized by law enforcement agencies to register sex and arson registrants. CSAR is specifically utilized by law enforcement agencies within the state of California and is maintained by California Department of Justice.
Law enforcement agencies within the state make entries into CSAR to record registrants moving into, out of, and within jurisdictions, and also to capture time spent in custody. Offender Watch is a database created by Watch Systems. Hundreds of law enforcement agencies within the United States utilize Offender Watch to maintain their registration information. CSAR and Offender Watch are mainly used by the San Diego Police Department and the police department's registration unit located at police headquarters. The sergeant, detectives, and officers in the registration unit can make entries into both databases. Other law enforcement personnel may access the information in a read-only format. The information in CSAR and Offender Watch contain names, physical descriptions, residential and work addresses, telephone numbers, and vehicle descriptions of the registrants. The information is utilized by law enforcement agencies to enforce the registration requirements. Some of this information is made available to the public through the Megan's Law website and the National Sex Offender Public website. Thank you.
As assume there's multiple technologies that work with CSAR. Is Offender Watch used in conjunction with other tools?
No, Offender Watch is basically just the database where we collect this information that the registrants are required to report to us.
If there is an error, say, you have the wrong name or the wrong person that's identifying, in the Offender Watch. I see here on data retention, it says the database and the data contained is maintained permanently. What would be the process to get the person's information out of there, just in case they were matched up with like someone with a similar name or who was someone who was actually a sex offender? How does that happen? Is there the data retention? Do you contact the company and ask them to fix that? What is the process for that, just in case someone in error is on this database?
Well, because we're using Offender Watch and CSAR in conjunction,
Mhm.
we could double check our work, and actually all of the entries are double checked by another officer within the office.
Okay, thank you.
So that's validation sort of after the fact. What kind of process is there for at the time of entry validation, cross-checking with CSAR? But I mean, if there is an inaccuracy or if there is a slight difference in record, how is that pursued? And more so, even if there isn't an issue, how is the process generally pursued? Levels of oversight are there for that.
A lot of times our offenders do have secondary, tertiary names. We call them AKAs, and all of those would be collected within the Offender Watch and within CSAR. So the name that we use in both programs is whatever CSAR recognizes them from their convictions.
Very much.
Our last presenter from the evening is Lieutenant Matthew Dobbs on Nighthawk. As he's making his way up here, please note at your next meeting, I anticipate you will have 20 technologies to review, 10 from the last community meeting in January and 10 more in February prior to that. So if you're building your agenda out, we're looking to present potentially upwards of 20 technologies next month.
Noted. Thank you.
How do you spell CSAR?
I think CSAR.
CSAR, I believe is CSAR, CSAR, is that the acronym? They're all nodding their heads, so I think I got that one right.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. My name is Matt Dobbs. I'm a lieutenant with the San Diego Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the robbery unit. I'm here to present Nighthawk LEO vision for you. Nighthawk is a data analysis tool that's primarily used in our homicide unit. We began using that back in 2021 when I was assigned to the unit as a response to a backlog of social media returns and data sets that we were unable to search just by the sheer volume. many of the returns now, because of the increase in the platforms and the amount of data that we're getting, were so voluminous, we couldn't even open them on our computers. So we needed a way to do that. Nighthawk gives you the ability to drag and drop into a secure government cloud for analysis with their software. We currently have 20 authorized users. All of them are vetted by myself, and they're given access to the system based on their current assignment and investigative need. As I said, most of them are within the homicide unit and they're related analysts. All of the users attend training. They'll sign an end of use agreement, which they will acknowledge all the existing department policies, procedures in regards to accessing computers and information on a right to know, need to know basis, and they have a lawful ability to view. When they log into the system or any department computer system, they also have to acknowledge the department policies on that as well. And we also do random audits of the access to the system. And there's also a program built in by the vendor to alert us that there was some kind of suspicious activity going on with the platform. As I said, this system, what does it do? It allows the investigators to coordinate and make a searchable data set of the social media returns and what other information has been uploaded into the system. It does not retrieve, it does not harvest, it does not collect any information. It's just an organizational and data analysis tool for the information that the investigator uploads into the system. So what can they upload into the system? Any lawfully obtained data set, whether it be a social media return, a cell phone download, that they have a lawful right to have. Typically, that is going to be by a search warrant or signed written consent. As of today, I'm not aware of any data set that has been uploaded that was not uploaded under a search warrant. When you talk about these search warrants, they mentioned it before, search warrants for electronic communications fall under the California Electronics Communications Privacy Act that was passed in 2015. It was touted as the most stringent legislation against the access to communications data by law enforcement. So your standard search warrant, as I said before, is probable cause, is the legal measure for that. ECPA goes much further than that. That's very limiting on the information that you get. It has notification requirements to the owner of the information that you're getting. And it's a much more stringent judicial review to get that information. The courts and the legislatures understand that when you get into that information, you're getting quite a bit of personal information. Once the investigator has uploaded and conducted their searches, the data is removed from the government cloud and it's stored in its original means in compliance with the evidence code. Any evidence that's obtained via search warrant has to be retained by the detectives until they get authorization from the court for its disposition. Just because they may decide they don't need any more, they cannot get rid of it. You have to get the court's approval prior to doing anything like that. As an illustration of the effectiveness and the use of this system, since late 2021, we really started using it. We have uploaded and analyzed nearly 31 million lines of data. A very conservative estimate would be that would take an individual investigator 2.5 years full-time only doing that, just to look at the lines of data, not to do any analysis or comparison, to put any context to it. Obviously, we're talking about homicide investigations. Time is of the essence, and being able to analyze this data to do a thorough investigation is imperative. And for us to lose this, it would certainly have a dramatic negative effect on our ability to do thorough investigations and solve crimes and ultimately affect public safety. With that, I'll take any questions you may have.
I had a couple of questions. So you say the data is not downloaded. So this is data that's just on a phone already. So you're not getting any other data about the phone, say from like a Stingray tower or some other area that might have information about the phone.
This would be specific data sets that were authorized by the court for us to retrieve. It could be a Facebook return, a Snapchat account, a Twitter account. You can incorporate a cell phone download into there, and there may be some confusion because it does sound similar to what some of the other technologies do. Nighthawk gives us the ability to load them all up at once,
Right.
search them all as a set collectively. It also gives you the ability, if you have a case that involves multiple suspects, to incorporate those suspects' returns that you've got via search warrant also. And you can actually create timelines and conversations where one person may have sent someone a text, the next suspect texted or sent someone a direct message. There was a Twitter communication. So it is a very robust system that allows us to get a good, accurate picture of the communications and the searches that were going on.
So can you give me an example? I know from my work with the police, social media and texts are very important for solving crimes. What would this software look like in terms of mining text or social media?
Typically, they're used in almost exclusively in homicide investigations, but it would be communications between suspects, and, with the changes in legislation, being able to show that someone was an active participant in a crime and showing some relationship to it. There's location features. Like I said, you can tell what's being shared amongst the group or just the individual. And one of the very first cases we actually used this technology on, we were able to exclude people from the suspect group based on the information that we were able to review and find using this technology.
What would the access to the social media look like? If you could give me an example. Typical.
The social media access you get is the court and the equitable warrant will describe to the provider, whatever service provider is, exactly what you're entitled to receive, whether it be limited to a certain timeframes, only certain communications, and the providers get the search warrant that explicitly lists what we are entitled to get. We would get that information. So we may not get, say, a crime happened in January. We're not going to get December and prior. We're going to get information that's relative to the time frame of our crime. And whatever we have to show to the court, we believe that there's information in this communication or in this device or in this data set that would be beneficial to our investigation.
Okay, and just for clarification, because you said there's no data downloaded. So a device like a Stingray, those were used in the past by law enforcement to get inside of people's cell phones. Like that Stingray technology wouldn't be involved in any of this
We don't
process?
use Stingray, and my understanding is Stingray was to locate a device, not to download information from it.
I have a question, please. So I have two. The first question I have is, when you say that it's in the Amazon government cloud, can you tell me which cloud account that is? Are you saying the city of San Diego AWS account or the federal government or state?
It's the Nighthawk. It's attached to the broader government cloud, and it's their security features meet and exceed all the CJIS requirements by the FBI for cloud-based storage of government documents.
Okay, so then I don't have a second question, thank you, but I do have a really good comment. Just looking at this, that was the winner for me because anything obtained in the AWS cloud environment is super secure. And the second piece, multi-factor authentication, the MFA, is awesome. And that made me feel really good to know that we're actually using cloud technology for data retention. One of the things I will say that when we look at your auditing and oversight, you may also want to note that anything that's logging into MFA, multi-factor authentication, can also be used for auditing purposes. So you have a third fail-safe when it comes to who's accessing the data, who's getting in there. So you should also, I'm just suggesting, you listing your MFA logs that you probably don't access, but Nighthawk does, but you do have access to it as the proprietor.
And Nighthawk sends me
Exactly.
they'll send me a report. It shows
Yep.
who's logged in, how often, how many data sets, what they were
Yeah.
from, whether it was Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook,
Yeah.
cell phone. So we do have, they send us quite a comprehensive.
Yeah, so you're covering yourself too when it comes to the audit piece. So I just wanted to offer that. Thank you.
Lieutenant Dobbs, just to clarify, you're with the robbery unit, right?
Currently, yes.
You said the majority of times this is used for homicide. Is it also sometimes used for other things such as robberies or no?
When I was assigned to the homicide unit, I requested the purchase for this technology, so that's why I'm still the administrator for it. But there are several analysts that have it. There's the Ghost Gun team. They have one account. I believe there's one in the gang unit. And I think that's about it.
I had a follow-up question. Is when you're looking at social media using this software, is it also used sometimes in conjunction with facial recognition software? I know in the past that some law enforcement will get inside social media, maybe they'll see someone that they think is associated with a gang member. They don't know who this person is, and then they'll deploy facial recognition on top of maybe the kind of scenario that you're talking about. Would that be an uncommon thing kind of to think about how facial recognition could be used with it?
We're precluded from using facial recognition in our investigations. And the Nighthawk system is very scalable and can be modified in any configuration you want it. And when we developed our account with Nighthawk, that any facial recognition abilities were disabled. So it does not have the ability to do that for us.
Any other AI capabilities?
Not that I'm aware of now.
Thank you.
It's merely just a search engine for the data that's there.
So I have a few questions. No offense to all the other technologies. Yours seems to be one of the most interesting ones. Just briefly, kind of piggybacking on, could you give me an example? So a murder is committed. What would the next step in using Nighthawk be, using Facebook and mobile phone records, and how would that be used exactly?
The investigation would go on when you start identifying suspects or suspect groups into a crime. You start requesting search warrants under ECPA from the court. You'd be entitled to whatever the court decides that you're going to get, and then you would be able to upload them. Like some of the other, like the CellHawk technology is a very wonderful technology to have, but it is for that one device at that one time. The difference for this is you have multiple suspects, multiple platforms. You upload them all into the case that you create in the cloud and inside Nighthawk, and you can search them, like synthesize it and search them all as one, or you can parse them out. So you would be able to, people communicate on multiple platforms throughout the day, depending on who they're communicating with. So that gives us the ability to look at the broad scale of the communication and the activity going on to be able to get a good picture of it. Prior to that, we would have to go page by page through a Facebook return and try to remember that when we're looking at a cell phone report and basically holding pieces of paper up in front of us and kind of putting them together to make sense of it.
Got it. And so it's like Facebook Messenger and like messages that are going between folks.
Yeah, there'd be Facebook messages, if they're making posts, it would be, if they were direct messaging anyone using, if they use Snapchat, if they use Instant Messenger, any of those things that we had access to, we'd be able to look and see what communication between who and about what the context was.
Does it work with Roblox?
I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
One of the areas that we work on a lot in the community is gang documentation, gang enhancements. Sometimes the question of association comes into the conversations when we're dealing with enhancements. Can this type of technology be used to prove gang association that could lead to enhancements or even documentation?
The technology itself, no. But if there were to be a conviction from a case that this technology was used on, if there were some predicate offense or communication, some documenting criteria that was in there, I suppose it could. But the information that you obtain from a search warrant is used for that case and that case only. It can't be, shared with anyone else other than someone on a task force or someone else associated with that crime, except under very rare circumstance. So you couldn't take information out of communication and give it to a gang investigator and say, hey, this guy should be documented, look at the communications they're having, because they would not have a right to that information for that purpose.
Got it. Thank you. And then a quick follow-up. I might have heard incorrectly, but in the beginning you said that you can't think of an example where this has been used without a warrant. Does that mean that there's a possibility to use it without a warrant, but you just choose to get the warrants, or
If someone were to give consent to their cell phone or their social media account, we would lawfully be able to upload it. But I can tell you from working the homicide unit for 7 years, we do very little on consent there. Everything's going to be done by a search warrant.
Got it.
That was my question. So just to be clear, this technology is strictly used with a warrant, not with probable cause or I'm sorry, reasonable suspicion wouldn't be enough to use this technology.
No, by state law, in order to have access to the cell phone and the data and any of the social media accounts, you have to get a warrant based on probable cause and then some under the ECPA Act.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
So as Lieutenant Dobbs said, 7 years in homicide. He recently earned a well-earned transfer to robbery, I think, to catch his breath a little bit. So maybe get some sleep. That concludes our 10 presentations for this evening. Obviously, I'll leave it up to you if you want to bring anybody back for additional questions or if there's additional items or the next agenda item.
We'll comment first and then we'll, any follow-up and then we'll ask people directly up, but meantime, we'll do public comment. Any in person?
Thank you, board members, and thank you to the officers who gave their presentations. Overall, there's a lot of information to digest there and probably too many questions to point out about the individual technologies. So maybe we can communicate or we can submit things to the board later. But one thing that I would like the board to consider after all of that questioning and all of that back and forth is that each of the questions that was asked by the board today to the officers probably represents a deficiency in the use policy submitted to the board by the department. The habit we're getting into, I understand we're still getting started here, but a habit that I would really think would be beneficial for the public if we got out of was these surveillance use policies coming into the board, cruising right through the board, through committee, all the way to city council and approval, untouched. These things are not ready for prime time. Every question you guys asked today proves that. You guys have very important questions with regards to how are these technologies used? How are they secured? When do you use them? When are you required to get a warrant? This stuff should be written down, right? Like this is stuff that the public should not have to dive through 4 hours of video to find out the answers to. So as you guys work through this stuff, I hope that you'll be able to in the future require the
Thank you.
departments to add this stuff. Now I'm out of time on 2 minutes on 20 technologies that were just presented. So that's pretty rough, but hopefully we can get some of this stuff in writing. Thank you.
Yeah, as a habit we normally do, 1 minute, 2 minutes has been if we just don't have a ton of space to go for, but
Like to point out to the public that you are always welcome to reach out to any one of us. You're welcome to email us. I have my Twitter open for any PAB stuff. And again, you can email us. We have a email address that is
currently need to be like, the comms team needs to get back on that. So that's the SD Privacy Advisory Board at gmail.com. So we should be able though to reach out directly regardless. And as a board, we're always here. Fine. So I think we're going to go forward and we've had some time to think about the initial questions. If there's anything further, a specific representative who spoke earlier, we can ask them up. As mentioned, one of the things that we'd like to do is to actually get some of these recorded. So I have some follow-up questions and initial questions that we definitely want to hear responses from. So if we can get those in our committees to the PD, that would be great. Open the floor up now for further questions. Maybe we can, if you know the technology, we can get the right person up here. Or if it's better up for the questions to be asked later on, we can probably do that in the interest of time as well. In that case, well, thank you everybody who spoke today from the PD. We're going to move on to item 5. Request to review Mission Bay and OB Peer UASI camera system.
How are you? Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm James Gartler and I'm the lifeguard chief for the city of San Diego. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a presentation. I don't know if we're going to be able to get it up. If not, I have some paper copies here for you. So, again, thank you for the opportunity tonight. Not everybody knows about the lifeguards, so I'm just going to give you a real quick overview of who we are and what we do. So the lifeguards are a division of the San Diego Fire Rescue Department. Our mission statement is to provide the highest quality safety service in the coastal and aquatic environment for the public through rescue, education, outreach, medical aid, beach management, enforcement, and prevention. The full division, we have 141 full-time personnel, 225 seasonals in the summertime, 11 rescue boats, 4 fire boats, 43 trucks, specialty apparatus, and 57 peace officers. The area we cover is 17 miles of coastline on the Pacific Ocean, 27 miles of coastline on Mission Bay. So a total of 44 miles. We go 3 miles out to sea as our jurisdiction. We do observation on all the city beaches during the day. We have a 24-hour response crew, and we have a 24-hour dispatcher. So how does it work? We observe the public out there. We do our best to prevent any rescues from happening, and then we conduct rescues. The prevention is the big piece. We make about 5,000 to 10,000 rescues a year, but in the United States, prevention is key for aquatic safety. Almost 175 million preventative acts occurred in 2022. The lifeguards here in San Diego made almost 500,000 preventative acts. We move the public around and keep them safe by setting up swim zones, using PAs, vehicle patrols, vessel patrols, and then our camera system covers the 27 miles on Mission Bay. So that UASI camera system, that's what I'm here to discuss. It is 11 cameras and 10 of them are on Mission Bay. One is out at Ocean Beach Pier. This is a UASI grant funded camera system. It's been in existence since 2005. And what we're currently asking for is to replace the cameras on that system. These are the locations. That's all in the use policy that you have in front of you, and the impact report just has all the GPS coordinates and where they are. So that's all that is. And you guys have that in front of you. I just thought we'd speak to it. The map gives a little clearer picture. If you look closely, it's a mesh network. So this is where all of the cameras are out on Mission Bay, and then there's one out on Ocean Beach Pier. What these cameras do is give us situational awareness. They let us see what's going on out there in Mission Bay. If there's an accident, somebody slips under the surface, we can go back and look, and it'll help us with our search. We can see speeding vessels. We can see who's out there on Mission Bay and send units to it. So it makes us, we embrace the technology, makes us more efficient and more effective. And it helps keep Mission Bay safer. So who can view this? The SDFD classifications are there. They're in the impact report. All the full-time lifeguards are post-certified background. And so that's who's looking at it from SDFD. The San Diego Police Department can also view it at the lifeguard headquarters or at the Emergency Operations Center when we have the Emergency Operations Center set up, and then JHAWC, the Joint Harbors Operations Center. So that's where our federal partners can view these camera systems, but all of the data is kept at lifeguard headquarters. And those are secure areas. At JHAWC, you cannot have a cell phone in there. You have clearance to even go into the area where the cameras are viewed, and they all have background checks. There are peace officers there. The data can also be addressed by law enforcement. So the State Department, if they're trying to make conviction from something that happened out on Mission Bay, they'll use that data. So what outreach did we do? We went to all of the affected community groups. The captain went to the Mission Bay Park Committee. I went to the Mission Beach Town Council and the Pacific Beach Town Council. Those are just the numbers of citizens that were there, the questions and answers that we received. And this is the civic engagement that we did to socialize this product that has been out there since 2005. So simple request in accordance with the board notification and review requirements outlined in San Diego Municipal Code. We're asking for approval for this system. Really, all we're doing is changing out the cameras. Is there any questions?
I have a question. I don't see the impact report. Did I miss that? Is it on our website? I don't see it, or the use report. Is it called RealQuest? What's it?
Oh, yeah, I don't
Jayhawk.
see it here on the website.
It was
Yeah.
uploaded to the.
Yeah, I received it and,
Okay. Okay, maybe we can save our questions, but I love that, I like the presentation. It's really nice. I only had, a question that, and is the technology called Jayhawk UASI?
the-
Okay,
The Jayhawk is the Joint Harbors Operations Center.
okay,
And that is the operations center on Sector San Diego, the US Coast Guard base that is protected with an armed guard. You have to get clearance to go into that area. So there is US Coast Guard, Customs and Border Patrol, Air Marine assets, and
okay.
that's it.
But you're gonna get us the impact and use policy, because I don't have it, maybe. Okay,
I'm gonna
perfect.
send it out to the board right now.
That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I kind of ripped through that if you don't have it in front of you. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Can you talk a little bit more about the access that law enforcement and Jayhawk have to this? When, why, how? Because one thing for the lifeguard unit to have that makes sense. I understand that. But then similar to what we saw with smart streetlights, then there was access given to others. So I want to understand a little bit more about why they have access.
Yep, so it's obvious why the lifeguards want it. I think everybody's clear on that. SDPD actually has a bay unit that is out there on Mission Bay. And whenever there's a vessel accident, SDPD, the lifeguards go in there, we do the rescue work, we gather evidence, but San Diego Police Department comes in and they do the full accident investigation. So any of that, they're also assistance for search and recovery when things go under the surface. They have an ROV, they have a state-of-the-art vessel that will do side scan sonar. So that is the access that SDPD has. So these can only be viewed currently at lifeguard headquarters and the Joint Harbors Operations Center. And if there is an emergency on Mission Bay and we open up the Emergency Operations Center at Ridge Haven, we have the ability to have that situational awareness and pump that in there. But so SDPD uses it for law enforcement. They don't do a lot of surveillance in our lifeguard communication center. That's where this can be viewed, in the lifeguard communication center. So they may come up to get some situational awareness. Hey, how's the bay looking today? Are there people speeding in East Bay, West Bay? The bay is gigantic, 27 miles for, not a lot of officers, 141 officers for 44 miles of coastline. So not a ton of staff there. This technology gives us the ability to go to the places that are busy. And then if we see an accident, we can send a vessel there. So there's somebody 24/7 in the lifeguard communication center. If something happens out on the bay, they dispatch those folks out. We work in conjunction with SDPD. We could not execute our mission on Mission Bay without the San Diego Police Department boating unit. The boating unit also is out in the field, out on the beaches, and they help us do some law enforcement out there. They prefer to do the law enforcement. That way we can keep our eyes on the water and do all of the rescue work. So we're good partners with SDPD, and that's why they have that access. They can also make cases. They can go back and see what happened on vessel accidents. For Jayhawk, for the feds, I am the harbor master for Mission Bay, but the captain of the port, Captain James Spittler, he's the captain of the port. So he oversees all of this area, and he actually has the authority to oversee all of the waterways in this sector. So that is why the US Coast Guard has the access to it. Also, Customs and Border Patrol, they have a different mission than us, but they have people in the Jayhawk to see who's coming and going on the docks. So there's quite a bit of maritime smuggling that goes on in San Diego, and this helps them make cases with the State Department. So if they do see some activity, they will contact me. We don't release any of the data unless it's in writing from me. And then they come out to Lifeguard Communication Center and they burn their copy and it goes directly to the state.
Do Immigration, Border Patrol, ICE, do they have access to this information as well?
Only through the Joint Harbors Operations Center, and they can visualize it, but they can only go back and review film at the Lifeguard Communications Center.
Okay, thank you. And do you feel as if, so it sounds like the lifeguards are unbelievably understaffed considering how many, how much you're doing. Do you feel like technologies like this pose a risk of actually making it more difficult to make the case for more lifeguards? Like, are these actually replacing human beings?
No, I think the data speaks for itself. When there's accidents, when there's an accident or something happens, you still need that human being, right? And it isn't realistic for us to put observers out on Mission Bay 24 hours a day or in the off season, right? So in the off season, you don't have the traffic like you have in the summer. So when an accident occurs, which they happen all the time on Mission Bay, we can see that. So it's not really replacing, it's enhancing our situational awareness and it's making us efficient and effective. It also gives us the ability to decide where to go on the bay. We have our set patrol schedule. We always know there'll be a vessel out, but if there's nobody in an area in Mission Bay, there's no sense to send a vessel there. We'll send them to an area that has more traffic.
Is this a new policy in terms of allowing access to, say, the Border Patrol have access to the video footage, or has this always been is there a pre-existing policy working with potential federal law enforcement?
There's a pre-existing policy, and they've always had access to it since 2005. So we just revamped the policy, documented what is going on there, put it in the format that was preferred, and that's what you see in front of you. So we didn't name every classification that had access to it before. We just said the entities, U.S. Coast Customs and Border Patrol, Air Marine Operations. So we put all the classifications in there, and then the U.S. Coast Guard has a couple contracted folks that stay with the U.S. Coast Guard. So if you don't know the feds, they rotate every 3 years. So they have a group of civilians that get the background checks and they stay with the area and with sectors. So those positions are listed in here as well.
Any further questions? We could probably get them in writing and then get them in later on.
That's wonderful.
I am going to ask a question about data retention, how the images are stored. And I'm assuming because it's a UASI, it's on a memory card and then uploaded into a machine somewhere?
It is,
Okay.
yes, it's on a computer that is housed at
Your head.
Lifeguard Communication Center.
Thank you.
And it's behind a locked door and I have the key.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Garland.
Thank you, guys.
Nice
Any
to meet you.
comments? Online comments? All right, we'll move on to item 6. We have 4 recommendations that are posted. 1 for each committee that was assigned technologies. I'm not going to go through every single technology name, but the 4 committees were the ABOL Ops Fire Rescue Committee, the ICAC Committee, and then 2 committees on UAS drones. So 1 was committed to the DJI drone and the other one's committee had the rest of the drones. I think we can do this a few ways. We can present them and ask if we have comments on that. We can not present that, but of course, in the interest of time, if we had time to review the drafts as well. Any comments out of that? Just keep that in mind, but we'll start with start with a presentation. If anybody has anything they want to say ahead of time, then we'll move to public comments and then we'll go to the vote and discussion. So I just want to commend everybody in this board, for just being a part and just getting some of these reviews to each of our little parts here to the finish line. And it's no small feat to do this, especially over the holidays. So just thank everybody for being a part of this. Anybody else?
Can you just clarify again exactly what it is, the steps?
So the four documents to vote on, and then we're gonna have public comment. And then we're gonna vote on them and discuss. Item 6, that's right.
Are we briefly going to go over each one and then?
Yeah, we're gonna do each one. So we're gonna start with the Able Ops Fire Rescue vote, and then after public comment, just want to see if there's anything else, anybody else there for comment? Not seeing any online. Maybe a few words on the fire memo. Otherwise, we can discuss it. We can try getting up on the screen. Otherwise, we can just vote on what we posted. Anyone from the Fire Ops Able Committee want to speak on that? I think that was Lee, Bob, and I think that was Khaled or me, Sid, yeah. If you want to speak to the draft memo that we're gonna vote on. Otherwise, we can go ahead and, all right, the summary is to recommend to approve, as we can see on the screen. This is for the technology, it's to approve with, okay, as you can see on the screen, it's for Evelex, Vigilant Robotics, and UAS for the fire. To approve the proposals as written.
So I would say this is not as written. This is saying approve with these modifications around compliance and monitoring. If that's not what the committee intended, we should move all of that verbiage around controls and processes to an appendix and say these are just general things to keep in mind in the future. But as of right now, as written is good enough, is what this is saying, right?
Yeah, I'm okay with, so I'm okay with proposing a motion to move that to an appendix or later on, just so summary just stops it as written.
And just for public clarification, can we just briefly say what this technology does? So that people know what we're voting on or considering?
I was on the committee for that. And then I know they spoke to us in the November one, so maybe the committee can speak to that. Well, the UAS is the drone technology, but it's used for the fire department, fire rescue, and the robotics uses the robot, but and I'm not sure, I think Vigilant was just,
So a while back, I basically don't remember too well.
yeah.
When I look at this, I do know that we spoke about it in the November meeting, but like you said, it's the Avalex, the Vigilant, the robotics, and the unmanned. And I remember we spoke about it, and then that committee dove deep and spoke with all those departments and got their answers, and then they came up with a recommendation to move forward.
So are we making motions now or?
Yeah, maybe we should.
I would like to amend this to move all of the discussion to an appendix because it's kind of just extra stuff because what we're saying is to approve as currently written. Unless somebody wants to actually add this as recommendations, in which case we're saying approve with modifications.
Okay, I second that. I second that, what you said. the
Okay, so
motion.
you're saying approve with modifications.
No, what you said about the appendix.
Okay, appendix.
So I'm just same page. You're motioning so that we move that to the appendix and we vote on that modification to pass that. And you seconded that. Just, okay. All in favor? All opposed? Is that unanimous? All opposed? Is that an abstained vote, Khaled? Okay. I thought you raised your hand to vote on the yes in favor. Sid?
No.
Okay. So that does not pass?
So I make a second motion to change the recommendation. The PIB recommends the city council approve the proposal with the following modifications.
I mean, is there a modification that you'd approve of?
It's written right there. They're saying they need better controls. They need to specify their access.
Is that what you're saying?
I would be more comfortable with that, yes. I think part of the problem is because of people's limited time and abilities and everything like that. The discussions that we had were after the conversations were kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, under the impression that there might be an opportunity to dive into a deeper discussion around those things. I see there's no opportunity to do that. And so because of that, yes, I think that with recommendations, whatever you said last, Pega, makes the most sense to me. I would feel more comfortable voting for it. Really, the only technology there that I think I had any reservations over was Vigilant. So that's the other issue, is we're grouping them all together. And so
So it was
I wouldn't mind doing it so that your recommendation was specific to Vigilant. If that makes it easier for people, or if it makes it more confusing, again, because we're dealing with multiple technologies. And it sounded like Mihir was okay with just appendixing it.
Yeah, my question is, so what are we actually recommending that gets changed here? Like what gets modified?
the recommendation that Lee's committee had was that there needs to be tighter oversight and audit procedures.
Okay.
All this discussion stuff is just discussion. That can go to the appendix, but the recommendation was they have better audit and controls.
So we're recommending that the proposal does not pass. And then we have to draft something to place that with, or just recommend that they pass better auditing, or what's recommended in that?
What's recommended in that?
Okay. Then I can second that.
The proposal is to change the recommendation to say the PAB recommends that the city council approve the proposal as modified below. And as modified below means include tighter controls and better auditing procedures.
We'll amend that to say, as modified below, and then say to improve their controls as the summary states. So just making that first paragraph readable.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have another issue. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear what we're talking about. Are we talking about all the proposals or just the fire one? Okay.
Gonna talk about mine.
Yep, this covers the 4 technologies and under the fire committee.
Well, there is a concern that I have in addition to what everyone said, and this is going to apply to all the drones. There was a court decision that came down very recently from the 4th District Court of Appeals that had something to say about the release of video footage. And so I'm not sure how much this applies to the fire case, but it certainly applies to the other one. And basically what the 4th Court of Appeals conclusion was that video footage cannot simply have the blanket of being investigatory. That law enforcement, and I guess this might also, I'm not sure how applicable this would be to the fire department, needs to be able to distinguish between investigatory video footage and non-investigatory footage. This decision is now, by the way, going to the California Supreme Court. This is going to be the law of the land for most of California potentially, but for sure in San Diego. So I think we need to be familiar with this court case and have some language that addresses it. Again, this is probably applicable mostly to the law enforcement use of drones, but it might have implications for the fire department. This is a major issue. And I think it's not the board's fault. The court recently ruled on this over Christmas break, I think on December 27th. So this is a fairly recent court decision. And I think without considering what the California 4th District Court of Appeal conclusion they drew, we may be in violation of what the court has asked for. So this is a very serious issue, not a minor oversight. And I think there's some people here that might be qualified to speak on this issue as well.
I'm aware that, the person who filed the lawsuit is here, and I'm also, here to speak on it really quickly, if you wouldn't mind. The matter in which the lawsuit pertains to would be, I believe, Chula Vista's use of drones as first responders, but typically they fly in many cases as situational awareness tools. The use policy of Chula Vista is significantly different than San Diego PD, much less use of them, and then obviously much less use of them in a public venue where Chula Vista is claiming investigatory exemptions for all drone footage. Obviously, the court has responded back in the Fourth Circuit and said, well, not exactly. It's a case-by-case basis. You have to be able to look at certain things like, say, a missing person or a stranded vehicle or something along those lines may not fully qualify for that. Obviously, this is going up through the California Supreme Court. But again, this is significantly different than how we use our UAS items here in San Diego. Much different situation because we don't use them as situational as first responders in that regards. But in addition to that, any court case that comes back that says you shall do this prompts the immediate rewriting of our policies and or procedures. We have to comply with state law, particularly when it goes all the way up to. So right now that case is in flux, but our circumstances, I'm not sure how applicable it will be to us because in the manner in which we use our items, I think it'll be actually a limited use because we're not, using them dozens of times per day to go out and look for everything from car accidents to missing persons. With that being said, I do have a quick question, and I also need clarification when you're voting. If you wouldn't mind going back to what you had up on the item, and particularly go to item number 1 with your summary. When I'm looking at your recommendations, one of the things I'm looking at is at the bottom of page 1, where you say summary, right? But then go scroll down. Your last item before the bullet points go up. I looked at this and I said, we recommend the department enhance monitoring procedure audit by, and then bullet points. I've directed my subject matter experts to look at these particular bullet points, potentially for policy and procedure modifications that would be incorporated. Now, I can't stand up here before you because the chief of police ultimately has the say as to how we modify policies and or procedures. But I took that line, we recommend the department enhances monitoring procedures. Was I incorrect? Did you mean something different? Because that was the instruction that I gave to my subject matter experts as to when we go to eventually to public safety, depending on your vote when that is, I have to prepare a staff report that really addresses each one of these recommendations. Do we accept it? Do we disagree with it? Can we implement it? So that's why clear direction here tonight is so important. And I'm basing my kind of direction to subject matter experts in preparation of public safety based on that line. We recommend the following. So I just want to tell you where I was, and if I'm incorrect, I really would like to know that.
And unfortunately, the original drafter of this memo is not able to attend tonight due to illness. I think if there's any work done by the committee, they can speak to more of that. But I think what we can kind of just get to is like, we could probably still modify that and get to something if we have like a recommendation of what we'd prefer.
Yeah, I'd like to see, so the policy may be different in San Diego, but I want to make sure that our policy is consistent with what the courts have sort of determined so far. So if it is the case that San Diego is in more compliance than the city of Chula Vista, I think that's great. But absent of language in our proposals, I think it's very problematic, especially since it is going to the California Supreme Court. So I think we need to have some discussion about the issue and at least have more public input given the recent decision by the court.
I disagree because I feel like we should be going by whatever the law is right now and whatever the standards
Well,
are.
this is the law by the court, by the Fourth District Court of Appeal, as of right now. It is the law.
So what is the dependency of our court system or our law enforcement system to make those adjustments?
I think that's a bigger issue
grace
that's going to
period?
require more discussion and more public input because there are huge implications for this court decision. And I think there's a way to make it work if it is in fact consistent the way you're describing it. But I think it's going to require a little more public input and a little more discussion by the board members. I don't think it's going to get resolved with the clock ticking right now.
But let me give you this. My unit's also in charge of CPRA requests. If it came to me as the commanding officer who responds to CPRA requests based on the Fourth Circuit's information, I would evaluate on a case-by-case basis, indicating there's not just an area to give blanket review. So if we had a missing person today that was truly a missing person or some kind of along those tasks, it would be my decision that in compliance with the Fourth Circuit and I would also have to consult with the city attorney's office because we don't just make decisions in a vacuum. I also consult with the city attorney's office with the pending of ongoing litigation. We would be leaning towards that based on where the law exists now. Obviously, you absolutely, sir, have the right to hold this on, but remember, you have a couple more weeks until your 90 days runs up and it moves to. So if whatever
February
you're gonna
7th.
do, move it quickly.
February 7th. If we don't recommend anything, it'll be approved by February 7th.
I mean, I think it's great that the department and the chief is aware of this, but these are the things I think that we have an obligation to spell out in our use policy and an obligation that the board has to address and at least consider. And this is a fairly recent court decision. So I don't feel comfortable moving forward with at least having a discussion, and at least having a discussion with you all about how we can get the language in here. Yeah, maybe it's not a big deal, but I think it requires a further discussion.
So we've got, 2.5 weeks to have that discussion, or we can talk about this now and then have this discussion in a more robust way during the annual review period or with the annual report. So those are our two options. Or I suppose we could have a special meeting.
Third option.
Mm-mm.
One suggestion would be to add to your recommendations, another bullet point that San Diego Police Department shall comply with all Public Record Act requests consistently in a manner in which the request is made. If the law is such that you release us on a case-by-case basis, given the circumstances surrounding it, then one recommendation could be that you will respond as the case law exists in consultation with your city attorney's office. And we do that all the time. Case law changes. Case law is dynamic. Things change all the time. Years ago, we didn't release various officer involved shootings, right? But then obviously 1421 came along and SB2 and 14, all the different laws that require us. So we do release everything pursuant to law. And one of the recommendations you could make today would just be, you shall continue to do that, incorporate that, into your UAS policy and or procedures, that you will follow all state law and comply with public record requests as the status of the law is at the moment the request is received. And that, because I have no idea how long state law is going to hold, right? Like, how long is the state Supreme Court going to see this? 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 months, but I look at things at the way it is now. And when I respond to that, I base it on the decision the way it is now. And then obviously, if it's not going to jeopardize, in my opinion, an investigation such that we're looking for a homicide suspect or some kind of piece of evidence tool where it truly is a case-by-case basis of a stranded vehicle, which we don't use them in that manner. But we could use them in terms of a missing person. I guess as long as that missing person doesn't end up being a homicide victim, then I think that would change it from just a simple missing person search to an investigation of a homicide. Those would be the kind of things that I would look at a case-by-case basis.
Well, I think we do have some clarity. The Fourth District of Appeal has already ruled. So yeah, there is a little bit of confusion, but I think we have enough from the law to already move forward. And I think what you said is a good start, but there are other issues as well. One of the questions that I have is, does San Diego Police Department use all video footage? Is it all categorized as investigative? That's very important, because if it does, then that's not going to be in compliance. And I don't see any clarification in the proposals that have come before us. That would be another issue that I think that would have to be addressed as well.
Yet to receive, at least I haven't seen a request for drone footage, at least come through my desk. I'm not saying that we haven't received one. I don't know if La Prensa has made one to the San Diego Police Department. I will tell you that we have very limited uses of our drones. They're typically case by case, more or less SWAT incident, barricaded suspects, which are truly investigatory in nature. However, I do know that we do use them to find missing persons, particularly in wooded areas where that may not be an investigation. But again, if it's not going to get resolved tonight, and if you want to have a more robust conversation, I'm happy to have that. Just understand you've got about 15 days, 16 days.
I definitely think more discussion is needed.
So I think we still have a motion on the floor that was seconded.
Quick point of clarification. When they presented to our committee, the police were presenting also. It wasn't only fire department. And so most of my concerns were not around anything that the fire department is doing it, but particularly with the police. But when we say that we're voting on the fire, so this isn't only fire department.
No, this is the technologies, Evolex, DVR and FLIR, 380, Vigilant, robotics for the fire department, and then UAS for the fire department.
Because I wouldn't want my concerns with the police department to get in the way of the fire department actually being able to move forward with their things, is what my concern is. So voting on 5 different technologies in one.
So this was one committee
Yeah,
that I think Lee was on and
Bob.
Mayor was on,
Here,
a couple of other folks that reviewed, and you, that reviewed 4 or 5 different technologies for fire as well as PD.
Okay.
You all reviewed it. You all came up with this draft.
Okay. I heard at one point that this was the fire committee or something like that.
No, I
wanted
think we
to
just used
clarify
it
that
as
it's not.
shorthand as,
fire, Able Ops for the 3 departments, and Able and Ops within SDPD. But that's a good point. I think that in regards of, if that's an issue with the wording for that, I think we can also motion to, I think there was compromise in mentioning, adding, SDPD shall comply with all blood record requests as pursuant to existing case law. That's something that I'm willing to meet in the middle about here. Add that to all of our recommendations, at least somewhere in the wording, if that doesn't exist. Just because we do have to vote or get something passed in 15 days, or else it'll just pass as is.
Good afternoon. Or good evening. I'm Stephen Lozano. I'm the Deputy Chief of Special Operations. So I oversee the UAS and the bomb squad. And we had those same questions, whether our technology is under X-ray, and that's the UAS and the bomb squad robot and the camera on board that we use to drive the device, but they're not specified in this. So if we were going to ask the committee if they wanted us to break down our technologies by name, and or if you wanted more, not more information, but if you wanted to maybe tell us which bullet points apply to us specifically for the fire department.
Yeah, I think the main issue is going to be how we categorize the video, whether on a basic level, whether it's investigatory or non-investigatory. And for the fire department, it's not clear how that might fit in, but at least the way it's categorized by your department would have implications for that.
That's what we were just asking, if we could just specify which ones of these concern us or which we'd like to have more information on from the.
so as it's currently written, the thing about having privacy policies and procedures and having clear audit and inspection, that applies to all of the technologies that are listed on this. If we add something about investigatory uses, we can say for those used by PD so that they can be, yeah.
And just for an update from talking to the UAS sergeant, virtually none of the court case or the CPRA case that's currently in place now would impact us. Because even when we're looking for a missing person, we're not filming. We don't collect ongoing film of that missing person. We're flying the drone. So if a request came in that particular circumstance, we wouldn't have any video to provide. So when a person makes a CPRA request, they're looking for that video. They're looking for that captured video of that drone flying So in regards to this, when you look at how we're using it, and off the top of my head, and I'm pretty good with this, roughly 40% of our SWAT are type SWAT incidents. They are clearly investigatory. The next biggest category, probably 30 plus 40%, homicide, robbery, those kinds of things, which are clearly investigatory. Other times where we fly the drones, we're not recording any video. So we're not really recording anything that would be considered non-investigatory in nature. However, if we did, be more than happy to sit there and say, if there's a request like the one I read in this litigation, evaluate on a case-by-case basis. I don't see where the department and or the matter would be harmed by releasing that. And that's really what the court indicated in the CPRA request. It's saying you can't just have a blanket exemption. I can't just say it's investigatory detention, King's X, and nobody gets anything. Because the public have to, in this role that I have, I'm constantly balancing the transparency, the public's need and right to know, right, versus true exemptions, whether they be, attorney-client privilege or deliberative process or, investigatory in nature, those things. But in looking at this and in talking to our drone operator, we're not doing the kind of things that we would collect video such that it would trigger this particular case. However, you have to feel what you do in your conscience. If you want to have a further conversation on this or another recommendation that says we will follow and or all law in regards to that, I'm happy to do that. Just understand I'm just more concerned about time constraints too. And I don't think this matter dies here. It also is going to be picked up at public safety and then again at city council.
I think there's a way to create an amendment that addresses some of the basic issues, which it sounds like in theory you're in agreement with. So
I'm in agreement with the court says. I follow court. The court decision says X, then I'm doing X.
Right.
And, there are some times where the city attorney's office say this might be unsettled law. But as of right now, this seems to be, such that, we're looking at these kinds of things. I don't see where we're using drones in the same manner where Chula Vista has, which triggered this kind of litigation. But again,
I think clarifying that in the use policy would definitely help all parties involved.
okay.
Sounds like we agree to add the amendment.
I think the standing motion was to add the amendment, and I just want to reiterate is to also, in the summary, modify it just to read, instead of as written, as modified below to improve their controls. And then the last bullet point, add for surveillance technologies used by the SDPD shall comply with all public record requests as pursuant to case law.
And I guess what I would add to that as well is that the police department needs to categorize upon use whether video is investigatory or not, because part of the problem in the case law is that the city of Chula Vista was claiming that all drone video footage was investigatory. So I think it's important that in the use policy, it's clear that the police make a distinction upon its use, whether it's investigatory or not. Because once something is classified as investigatory, the public has no access to it. So there needs to be controls when the footage is taken to clarify that.
So on that point, there's another committee report. I addressed that very thing. I just used different language than you did because their document said that everything is considered evidence. And that was odd for me. So I recommended one of the changes was not everything's evidence. Some things are just things you picked up. They might be accidental. They might be, you thought something was going to happen and then nothing happened. You're, recording a crowd in case something happens and nothing happens. So I made those recommendations in my committee's report to say they should be reviewed immediately by a UAS supervisor, I think in consultation with the incident commander to decide whether something is evidence or otherwise. So I've made that recommendation, which we can steal that language if you'd like.
Okay.
Included in this.
So I see 3 points. The first one is the importance of police categorizing video footage, whether it's investigatory or not. That's number 1. Number 2, to ensure that public has access to video that is obviously not investigatory. And number 3, generally speaking, that the drone use is consistent with current case law, namely the California 4th District Court of Appeal and the findings from that. And by the way, I know this seems like a monkey wrench, but this is a relatively new thing. This decision just came down in late December, and it has all sorts of implications for what we're doing. So it's not like, well, why didn't anybody think of this now, right? This is a very recent development that is very germane to our policy and what we're trying to do here. So those would be the 3 things in the amendment that I'd like to see.
I motion that we accept the recommendations of the committee that just presented, or with the recommendation, as well as the 3 points that Sid pointed out that could impact case law, could be impacted by case law.
Look at the points and
But if somebody needs
the-
them, I'll summarize. We want to, first of all, change the recommendation to say recommend as modified. SDPD shall comply with all CPRA requests in accordance with law. Video footage should be categorized into investigatory or otherwise. Public should have access to non-investigatory footage, and uses should be consistent with case law as currently exists. Yep, and that was seconded.
all in favor? All oppose? All abstain? That's 5 in favor, so that passes.
Can I do mine next?
Sure.
Okay.
This is for the ICAC.
Yes, this is the ICAC Technology Task Force Committee, Technology Review Committee. We reviewed Wooster Data Solutions, Wooster for Active Crime Inquiry Database, Wooster Research Suspects, Victims and Witnesses, MSAB's XRY for the mobile forensics and data recovery software, PenLink and the PenLink data investigation tool, MSAB Ravens mobile triage tool for warrant and consent. It's required that warrants and consents device data extraction has to happen with a warrant and consent. And then the National ICAC Data System. So the ICAC is the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. San Diego Police Department holds a membership on that task force. And so our summary says that the Privacy Advisory Board, or PAB, recommends the City Council urgently approves the proposed related to the above referenced San Diego Police Department Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force technologies with one recommendation. The PAB recommends that ICAC and SDPD collaborate to create better audit processes and documentation procedures for the two PenLink PLX technologies. And the reason why we recommended that is because it is not fair for one single sergeant to hold the responsibility of that audit process. We believe in great conversation with the board. We also noted some of our discussion points. And so that was our recommendation with the request to enhance their audit process. Otherwise, we had also asked that this process recommendation for a new audit or enhanced audit process be reported, a draft of it, by the annual report in 2025 to this board.
Point of information, this is the drafts that the recommendation just has recommendation in terms of what we want specifically to be modified in their use policy. I think that was the crux between as written and recommended, with modifications. So which one do we want?
We want, in our recommendation, we say, the PAB recommends that the City Council approves the proposal with a draft of the recommendations, with this draft of the recommendations at the annual report review for 2025 year, but that the city urgently approves the technology for the ICAC task force.
So I think a lot of like the A, B, C, I think those are just informational, right?
Oh, yeah, they're all informational.
Can we move those to an appendix as well?
Yeah, it's just, I put it as a part of the discussion so that someone
I
looking
think
at
the
it at a
main
high level.
I think the main recommendations that you're making are around the audit and who
Yes.
can do that, and also to provide a report in 2025. That's, I think, all that we need to say in the discussion to send over to council. I'm trying to reduce how many pages they have to look at, and then put any kind of additional background info as an appendix in case they want to dig in.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah,
That's not a
I don't
problem.
want to lose your actual main recommendation.
Well, I did bold it and I
Yeah.
did a really good summary up top. I just don't want them to say that we didn't include the stuff, but I can
They won't.
actually move it to
They
an
won't.
appendix. This is 2-3 pages.
Yeah, I think, I
Okay,
would say let's
so-
move it to appendix.
So do we, I'd like to motion that we approve the recommendation of the ICAC Technology Review Committee as written with the recommendations listed for their audit process and move the discussion points to an appendix for the final draft.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor? All opposed? All abstain? That's 5 in favor with 1 abstaining, so that one passes.
Thank you. I had the next one. I was the very first Drone Committee A. I reviewed, my committee reviewed all of the DJI uses of drone uses by SDPD. We can pull that up, please. One of the main things that we pointed out and we wanted council to be aware of is the fact that DJI is on various national security lists as well as on an OFAC list, OFAC being the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Control, for working with the Chinese military and providing some unsavory, unethical surveillance to the Chinese government. So they're on various lists, and I put that in there to make sure that council is aware of it and that the PD keeps a close eye on however that looks. Unfortunately, DJI also has, I think, a 70% market share, so it's kind of limited. PD, I think, is a little bit limited in other technologies they can use. So for that reason, we recommended moving ahead, but keeping a really close eye on how this progresses. So that's the critical note you see. And then if you please scroll down, you see in red, the specific recommendations that I've made, which include things like adding extenuating circumstances, including things like Sid had mentioned, to classify footage, whether it is of evidentiary value or not. If you can scroll down just a little bit, some of these were just clarifying and adding some verbiage that the PD had actually sent us as part of their questions, as part of their responses. So we recommended that the data retention be limited for things that are not of investigatory use. Again, if something's not evidence, public access should be provided for those things that are not considered evidence. Same with third-party sharing. They shouldn't be shared if they are evidence. And that's it. The other note that we had was that the pilot location is pretty readily findable by anyone that can access the signal. I don't know whether or not PD considers that sensitive. If they do, that is something they should address. If they don't consider pilot information sensitive, okay. So there you go. So we asked to approve with the recommendations above.
And just kind of add, it looks like you addressed some of the things that I had in my amendment. And I just want to make sure the things that aren't on there, I'd like to include the same things in the amendment that I mentioned into this proposal as well. The exact same language or something very similar.
Okay.
I raise
Same
a-
3 points. Yep.
I raise a motion to include the recommendations from the fire able ops that are not already stated in this proposal.
Yep, that would, the only thing would be to say consistent with case law, use as consistent with case law. Okay,
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Right, Committee B's recommendation, the rest of the drone technology, none of these were DJI, so did not have the national security concerns that had with them. Most of this just had to do with their use. So this one actually had a draft opinion of approve with just a discussion. We wanted the public and the PAB to at least really, and the police and the city to really understand the discussion that we had. There were a lot of deep questions that were asked about the technology, for example, the thermal capabilities and how exactly when they're deployed, audio recording capabilities, when exactly a crowd has crossed the threshold into, a riot or something that harms the public health. So I think those are important discussions to have, even if you think the technology being used should be approved. But I will raise a motion to include the changes from the variable apps that we talked about. So instead of as written, it'll be as modified, and then we'll have the modifications that we talked about.
It'll have the same amendment that we added to the other ones in this one as well.
That's right.
And also request that the things that are just informational be moved to an appendix.
This is the discussion, so the discussion is,
There are some things that are a Q&A that are just the questions that we asked and the answers that
Yeah.
PJ gave, that can be moved to appendix.
questions answered, move to the appendix as well. Have a second? All in favor? All right, all in favor? That one's unanimous as well. Great. So just thank you for the police for working with us through all that. We'll get those out. That will move us to item 7. Way to do it. All right, we'll start with parliamentarian. If anybody wants to run, you can just say you want to run. So we can leave that vacant. Great. Recorder, Lee has offered to continue as recorder. A motion to nominate Lee as recorder.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Vice chair. Any discussion? And oh, sorry, we haven't had public comment. Public comment. As that vote is not actually valid since we didn't have public comment yet. So if we public comment on our elections before we head out, but we only have this for 10 more minutes. So we're really trying to make this happen here.
No public comments.
Not online? All right, motion for Lee to be recorder. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Yep.
All right, unanimous. Okay, vice chair.
I'll nominate myself.
I will second. All in favor? Unanimous. I nominate myself to be chair.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. We're all signing this to another year of this. Thank you, everybody. And moving on to item 7, to adjourn. All in favor? Sorry. That seat is open. Yeah, nobody nominated. Yeah. So we'll hold that seat open. We can also, I think we can fit the election later on in the year if someone wants to run for that as well. But I didn't hear anyone wants to run. And I don't want to push someone in who they didn't vocalize that. Motion to adjourn. All in favor? Okay, that was a second. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time in February.